Welcome everyone to Managing Proactive Communications in a Mobile Environment. All lines will be placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Thank you. Tom Miller and Paul Brady, you can begin your webinar.
Thanks, Darshai. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for the webinar session this afternoon. My name's Tom Miller, and I'm the Vice President of Analytics at Noble Systems. Been with the company for almost 3 years now and joined it as part of an acquisition of a business called ALI Solutions or Austin Logistics. And ALI Solutions is an analytic business that I had worked for 17 years, wearing a variety of hats, including operating as the president and CEO prior to the acquisition. And today I'm joined by Paul Brady, and I'll pass it to Paul to introduce himself.
Thanks, Tom. My name is Paul Brady, and I'm the Analytics Implementation Manager with Noble Systems. I was part of that same acquisition with Tom, so I've been with Noble for about 3 years now, and prior to that I was with the ALI Solutions for about 8 years. So I also wear many hats. I'm primarily involved in the implementation side, so I work with our analytics team for the implementation of both our Calltech and OnCue products, as well as Vintio and speech analytics. So what we do, or what I do, is primarily geared towards creating predictive models and then understanding and implementing those predictive models in the contact center world.
The objective of our webinar today is to focus in on the environment, the issues, challenges, and strategies really that affect mobile phone calling and the mobile phone environment. And what we're going to do for this webinar is to really take some of the content and learnings that we had from a recent panel presentation at our SNUG user conference a couple months back. And so we put together a panel of experts amongst our customers to come up on stage and really share with us some of the challenges that they're facing in their organizations, whether it's collections or outbound sales, inside sales, outbound service, etc. So we had a couple different organizations that could represent this topic. What Paul and I have done is tried to pull together and synthesize a lot of the learnings from that session into this material so that we could share that with you. And so we'll go through it from that structure. Just a few terms before we get into it, because on the Noble side, we're going to talk about or mention a few of our Noble Systems solutions. So the first is a patented TCPA solution, which Paul will be able to touch on in this session. The second is a product called Calltech. And Calltech is a best time to call analytic application. It's using analytic models to predict the likelihood that each customer or each prospect would answer the phone and become a right party contact for every hour that staff were available. And then would also predict the likelihood that once that contact was achieved, that a positive outcome could occur. So a promise of payment or conversion of a sale. And that information in turn is used to help our customers create more productive and effective outbound calling campaigns. The next product is Total Contact. Total Contact is a new add-on module to our base Calltech system. And Total Contact is enabling us to get even more specific in our contact estimates, where we're differentiating and understanding and estimating mobile versus landline contactability. And then the final product or term here is OnCue. And OnCue is our enterprise campaign management application. It has real-time interfaces not only into our own dialer here at Noble, but into a variety of other dialing platforms, including Cisco and Avaya and Aspect and Genesis, etc. And so it's providing all the decisioning capability, the filtering, segmentation, compliance rules, and enabling records to be sent in a prioritized manner in real time in a trickle feed down to those various dialing applications. So maybe just to set the stage a little bit, I think anytime you're thinking about mobile phone operations in our industry, in our environment today, a lot of it is so focused on the regulatory situation. And so TCPA certainly has increased the challenges and just operationally the way we go about calling mobile phones, and particularly those in which you do not have express consent to contact. And one of the big challenges, and we've got a couple of the, we mentioned Baird versus Sabre and a couple of the cases that have come down. I think the primary point here is there's a lot of uncertainty in the environment today as to what is regulatory, what is compliant and what is not. We certainly work with a large spectrum of companies, and I know that there's a lot of questions out there in terms of how conservative or how to best apply operational practice to make sure that you're falling within TCPA. And I think it's really tricky. And from what we see, there's a lot of different decisions made. Some of our customers, I would say, are sort of ultra conservative, and others are just trying to find what can work in their environment. But obviously, everybody views this as a top priority, and obviously, everybody wants to maintain a high level of compliance. So there's been some news, and I don't know if everybody on the webinar here may be up to date on this, but just last week, some news came out of the FCC that's highly relevant to the topic. So the TCPA, apparently the first new ruling in something like 10 years, is set to come out soon. And from what we're hearing, and we're keeping on top of this pretty closely, it could literally be any day, but I certainly think it's going to be within the next 2 weeks, that there's going to be more clarification around some of these areas of ambiguity that I mentioned before. Again, this is completely focused on getting a better understanding on what needs to be done when you're calling mobile phones without consent. So this really doesn't apply to landlines, and nor does it apply to mobile phones where that express consent occurs. But where you don't have that consent, really what's happened is the commissioner has come out with some public comments. We picked up on them last Thursday. And again, nothing's formal and official yet. So we're sort of also eagerly awaiting the ruling. But what was clear from these comments is it does seem to expand the scope of the term auto dialer to potentially capturing not only smartphones but also preview dialing. I know that's been a question that's out there on whether sort of preview was something that was going to be outside the scope of automated dialing or predictive dialing more specifically, or whether manual dialing was sort of more the requirement. But it does, the comments seem to indicate that that definition is set to expand, and it does look like it will capture preview dialing in particular. It also looks like it's the ruling set to expand the scope of capacity to not only include present capacity for listen and calling, but also future capacity too. So, I think for a lot of our customers, this is probably not what they wanted to hear, and a little bit concerning, because rather than limiting some of this terminology, which I think everybody was hoping would come down in this ruling. It seems to expand on a couple of these key concepts. And then the final point here is they seem to indicate on this topic of reassigned numbers that basically there's a free mulligan in the sense that a company will have the ability to contact a number without knowing that it was reassigned. But once they make that first call, they'll receive a waiver for that, but that's it. And after that, they're going to have to, they're going to have to abide by the TCPA regs otherwise. Paul, anything to add from your side, or anything from sort of customer experience on this?
Sure. Yeah, a few thoughts. And although the FCC ruling might not be exactly what we're looking for in terms of defining present versus future capacity, it will be welcome to get kind of further clarity on what the regulations are. As you saw from the two cases we referred to in the previous slide, one of those is talking about whether or not we're allowed to send SMS over the phone. The other one is talking about when consent is captured. So there's a lot of confusion in this area where it leads to our clients kind of reverting back to the most conservative possible strategy. And when we get this FCC ruling, we'll get quite a bit more information on what's allowed, what we can do, because the FCC kind of dictates the rules rather than having disparate judges across various states and various localities trying to interpret and decide how TCPA should be applied to auto dialing. So although it might not be the best news, at least we'll have some clarity on how to go forward with these new rulings once the FCC releases their statement. And then just generally speaking, it's continuing to be a challenge for all of our clients to understand and make these changes, both operationally, how we're applying these strategies, and from an investment perspective, do we need to buy new solutions to adhere to these rulings when they might change in 3-6 months? So this FCC ruling, again, will provide us clarity, even from a technology roadmap, on where to proceed and how we need to start dealing with the consent. And even another point beyond just business, right? This will have probably a negative impact on our consumers or our clients as well. From the debt side or from the credit issuance side, as it becomes more difficult to reach out to your clients that may be in delinquency, that means most banks will stop issuing as much debt, which is going to hit, probably the most at-risk credit requirements, right? So people that need credit the most are going to have the hardest time getting to that credit due to some of these regulations.
Okay, and Paul, obviously this TCPA ruling, and I guess more generally the regulations to date, are a big challenge for all of our customers, probably everybody on this call today. Maybe if you can start off by just talking a little bit about how Noble is providing solutions to, maybe specifically our TCPA solution, to help our customers today.
Sure, and based on the comments of the FCC ruling, that might be required going forward as well, but TCPA allows us to manually dial these non-consented phone numbers outside of the normal auto dialer environment. So you can actually have your agents logged into auto dialer lists using the Noble dialer through the standard campaign management, and then when you have a group of records or specific phone numbers on a record that you need to dial through a non-consented fashion, TCPA allows your agents or your operators to move over to a separate calling list where all of the calls are launched directly off of the PBX within the telephony environment. So no calls are being launched whatsoever from any sort of auto dialer. There's no present or future capacity to launch auto calls. So that gets around, preview dialing, is that at risk, things of that nature. TCPA allows us to just skip that question entirely. But the biggest benefit over pure manual dialing, where you give your potential operators or agents a list of records to dial, is you still have a huge part of the benefit of using the auto dialer, where if you're using the Noble TCPA plus Noble call recording, you can still record all those phone calls. You can capture the activity of the account, so when your agents complete a call, you still capture call dispositioning, things of that nature. So you still have a huge chunk of the data that you expect to get when making auto dial calls. You still have the ability to capture those when you go through a more manual manner of dialing.
Okay, and so maybe the first step here is actually identifying or knowing which numbers are mobile versus landline, where you have express consent, etc. And I mean, I know that from our panel, we heard a lot about the focus and the priority of capturing consent, and a lot of time. And so, Paul, you've spent a lot of time consulting with our customers on this topic. Certainly, you were an active participant in our panel there. So, what do you see, and how important is this? I mean, there are examples to share on phone identification and capturing consent.
Sure. So a lot of this information is captured in sources outside of your auto dialer, right? So either through sales, you need to get phone type in some sort of field being presented to you from wherever your lists are being sourced from, or you need to understand phone type from reaching out and getting that information from an external data source that can scrub against your phones. If you're in more of a collections environment, when you issue credit, you need to understand, you need to have the applicant fill out what type of phone it is, and this goes back to how you structure your forms to offer credit and things of that nature. So even at loan origination, you need to be working with that team or that division of your company in ensuring you understand communication channels. If they put the number in home, there should be a checkbox next to it that says mobile, non-mobile, something like that. So regardless of where they're putting a number, we need to understand, or our clients need to understand exactly what kind of phone number that is. And I mentioned at the start of loan origination, but as Tom, you mentioned, one of the biggest points of the panel was this consent recapture. So if you do begin, or if you do not know if you have consent for a phone, obviously that'll be dialed through some sort of manual capacity, or even not dialed at all. Any customer contact, be that an inbound call or a manual outbound call, or even an email, or if they go into a bank office, or any time you might be contacting that customer, you should be training your customer service representatives to be trying to recapture mobile phone consent. You know, one of our larger clients has massive manual dial lists, and obviously number one objective is getting debt repayment, but the secondary objective for any manual call they have is recapturing consent on any cell phone. So even if the individual picking up the phone says, I can't pay right now, the operators are trained, okay, well, is this still a good number to reach you? Is this a mobile number? Can we call this mobile number? Things of that nature. You have to have agent training and agent scripting in place in order to be able to really recapture that consent. Because as we know, it's much more productive to dial through an auto dialer. You can keep your agents more busy, and therefore being able to get these non-consented phones or accounts back into the auto dialing world is a huge priority for our clients, and particularly for the panelists that were sitting out there at SNUG a few weeks ago.
Well, obviously the FCC is not too worried about productivity. That's not their primary objective when they're passing these new regulations. And I think that just makes it incumbent on our customers, on the industry, to be able to innovate and to find ways to recapture some of that lost productivity. as a result of having to execute on compliance and compliant execution. So you and I both come from an analytic background. We come from an analytic company. Maybe if you can share a little bit on how Noble is helping customers from an analytic perspective to recoup some of that lost productivity.
Sure. So the Caltech Total Contact module is designed to be able to create best time to call analytics and targeting for different types of phones within a unique account. So we all know mobile phone usage is on the rise. I think I read somewhere by the end of the decade, 80% of households will only use mobile phones. So the numbers are growing and growing, and we need to have solutions in place to be able to address these issues. As mobile phone usage increases, the Caltech Total Contact module can create these scores because the activity or the calling contact rates from a mobile call versus a landline call are significantly different. You know, on average, across our data sources that we conducted our research to create Caltech Total Contact, we saw that cell phones had almost double the contact rate, you know, the right person picking up the phone than the landlines. So with those rates, there's a huge opportunity to create models to predict this behavior. So we can create models for cell phones alone because they have such significantly different behavior than a pure landline call or even just an aggregate account level call. One other point to make, or one other thing to keep in mind, is when we're calling these cell phones, oftentimes without consent, you only have a finite number of calls you can make, right? Resources are much more constrained from an agent perspective when dialing manually versus when dialing through your auto dialer. And therefore, you need to make every call count as much as possible. You need to make sure you're calling these records at the appropriate time in these manual lists to maximize your productivity for those lists. And so having this best time to call schedule for manual lists specifically, or for cell phone lists specifically, this allows us to really target and get that best time to call for all of the accounts within your portfolio. And it gives us the opportunity to still claim productivity from auto dialing by being able to split out the consented phone numbers separately and create new models purely for the consented auto dialing numbers as well.
Yeah, I thought the other thing that, just to add to the research and the analytics around mobile phone contact, I thought it was interesting that the sort of the variability from hour to hour in contact rates for different individuals. And so when I know we've done a lot of research even in the home phone, business phone area, but again, business calling has obviously defined time frames. You know, people work typically within the same set of hours. And so, you know, what is handled today operationally, usually through dialing strategy, makes a lot of sense and tends to be very effective certain times when people are going to be at home or going to be at business. But mobile phone obviously is different. And I think the fact that we notice and can see that variability from one customer to another on the times of day that they're willing to answer and become that right party contact, I think it's not only is it interesting, but I also think it points to why the use of predictive analytic models is a good approach and an effective way of going about creating better calling schedules for both landline and mobile. All right, so, and I think in the slides so far, we've used a couple examples here where we've really talked about collections, and you know, I'm going to guess that maybe half or 2/3 of our customers are in the collection segment, but we have a lot of companies that are using outbound proactive contact for inside sales, for telemarketing, for you know, proactive outbound proactive service. So really the mobile phone challenges hit all proactive outbound functions. You know, it's not specific to one. And Paul, again, I'll ask you from your experience in working with the companies that are making, you know, inside sale calls to their prospects or they're selling over the phone. You know, any sales specific challenges to share?
Absolutely. You know, sales, I think one of the biggest challenges, and some of our panelists mentioned this as well, there is a lot more sparse data within the lists they may be using for their outbound contact. So where a credit issuer might know, you know, the full range of credit score, demographic information, et cetera, about their various account holders, with our outbound contact groups, they have a much more limited range. They might have a name, a phone number, maybe an address, and then they have to go out to these external sources to maybe flesh out those files, flesh out the information they know about prospective clients. So our panelists, due to this lack of information, have or were kind of erring on the side of caution, being even more conservative than potentially the credit issuers, the collections companies that we had when they were doing their outbound calling. So they almost always dial manually. If there's any uncertainty on phone type, they go out to external data sources to understand what type of phone they're dialing. So huge challenges in making sure that as an outbound sales organization, you're staying compliant within the rules of TCPA. And so being able to maximize your mobile calling within that environment is even more effective because of the psychology of these sales reps, right? So you want to be able to have happy, productive agents or reps on the phone, getting to see evidence that they're calling, being successful in their calling, making money, et cetera, right? You need to see that level of success. They don't care as much whether they're dialing manual because the company might get sued, or if you're dialing auto dialer and things are going fast, right? All they see is that they're making sales, they're not making sales, whether or not it's positive, and the floor is, you know, kind of from agents is happy and they're being productive. So that's where some of the solutions we have can really come into play, is on that psychology on the floor, where you can use either Noble TCPA to really simulate that kind of productive dialing mode, reduce some of the overhead that might be on your agents if they were dialing purely through a manual calling list, and really be able to track their sales as well. Or in addition to, since each call is so valuable when you're making these outbound calls in a potentially manual mode for cell phone, you need to be able to apply analytics and understand the best way or the best time to call, since we're so resource constrained through that environment.
And I think you hit on another point. You know, I described CallTech as being our best time to call application, but sometimes I talk to folks about worst time to call. And by that, I'm talking about those really unproductive hours of the day, maybe in the middle of the day, middle of the afternoon, where, to your point, Paul, you've got sales reps that may be trying to make contact and just can't get people on the phone. I think one of the things that analytics does very well is it enables you to cherry pick and become productive, find those people that actually do answer the phone at some of those low average contact times, and really put your reps in a position to have some level of productivity, which obviously is good for business, but is also good for really just sales morale or collections morale as well. Okay, so with that, that's sort of the formal content that we wanted to go through today. But we have some questions that were submitted, and as I'm looking through that, I think we've probably hit on a few of them. But let me pull out the questions that that we may not have answered directly, and let's take a shot at that. So the first question is, have you heard of any customers that are challenging the FCC ruling, or do you know if the FCC has a process for challenges? And I don't know, I've certainly heard specifically, or I've heard generally, I guess I should say, that some customers of ours are looking into that. Nothing specific that I know of. I also have heard that there's a 60-day window from the time that they will release this new ruling in order to post or process any of those challenges. So that's really the only information I have at this point. The only thing that I know of is that period of time following the ruling, and I'm sure that's something we'll sort of expect to hear a lot more about in the next week or so. The next question is, how about SMS text? How does that play into TCPA? How may it be affected? So from everything that we've heard, the clarity that's coming out again will group text SMS in with live calling. So again, if it's consented, text to a mobile phone with consent, no issue. Text to a mobile phone without consent, you still have to go through the kind of same TCPA guideline. So I think there's not a lot more that we have on that today. I think that's something that I expect in this ruling is going to be a specific point of clarification that will come out.
Right.
Another question here, Paul. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, Tom. On the SMS question, this goes back to when you're establishing the relationship with a potential customer. This is the form they fill out. Do you accept SMS? You get that prior consent. Otherwise, our clients on the panel were just not doing it. So without prior consent, don't send SMS. With prior consent, then it's acceptable. And there's a whole another area of SMS with the mini Miranda and things of that nature, making sure that in the collections world, the individuals have the appropriate messaging prior to sending any sort of collection type information. So there's certainly opportunity for SMS. There's also a fair amount of regulatory risk, not only with TCPA, but from general communication as well.
All right, and then Paul, the final question I'm going to direct toward you. See if you can comment on this. So the question revolves around multi-channel communication, ranking channels, and is there a way to, I don't know, improve or get more from TCPA by using alternative contact methods, meaning other than just the live agent calls? Is there anything that we've seen to be effective in this channel ranking area?
Sure. And again, I think this point can be thought of through the lens of making a manual dial is the most expensive type of outbound contact you can make. Therefore, if you can get the same results without making that call, then it's certainly worth your time to investigate and understand what types of other channels can be used to get that outbound contact, get that same type of result. So we have created custom models for each of our clients that are using this technology that can go in and rank different channels. So let's say you have an email address on an account, and then you have phone numbers. So you could say, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get a positive contact or a positive interaction, be that successful sale, delinquent account becomes current, what have you, if I use email. If it's below a certain threshold from email, what's the likelihood of that successful account resolution if I use consented phone numbers on an auto dial? And then what's the likelihood if I'm using manual calling SMS, other types of channels as well. And so if we understand kind of these thresholds of positive contact or positive resolution, that really can drive which one of those we're going to use. And you can add in the constraints of cost per communication, right? So email is essentially free. SMS, if you have it, is very cheap, even if you're doing the free to receiver, free to recipient SMS type dialing. And then we go into higher cost for predictive dialing, and then an even higher cost for that manual dialing type of communication. So really being able to use models to get the same effect for a lower cost can drive significant value and save your manual resources for those records that really need it.
Okay. So thanks, Paul. And that's and with that, we'll officially wrap up today's webinar. I want to again thank everybody who took some time out of their day today to join us for this session. I think, Paul, if you flip, I think we've got contact info on a slide. There we go. So I have listed, in addition to our general contact information, you can certainly send emails to me at tmiller@noblesys.com if there's any follow-on questions to the material we discussed today. Once again, I just want to thank Paul and Darche, and thanks for everybody for joining us.